Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CHCI Public Policy Fellow, Antonella Rocco.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Antonella Rocco. I am a CHCI Public Policy Fellow. I am serving Florida's 24th District in the office of Frederico Wilson. I'm delighted to be with you here today for our closing plenary entitled Immigrant Strength, Immigrant Dreams. First, on behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank FWD US, Amazon, and Altamed for their generous support of this session. I'm looking forward to hearing from our panel of distinguished experts who will touch on some personal stories about their individual or family immigrant journey and discuss with us the latest on the issue. Later in the program, we will hear from Representative Adriano Espaillat. U.S. Representative Adriano Espaillat proudly represents New York's 13th Congressional District. He is the first Dominican American to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Espaillat currently serves as a member of the influential U.S. House Committee on Appropriations, responsible for funding the government's vital activities to keep the United States safe, strong, and moving forward. He's also a member of the House Committee on Education and Labor and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, where he serves in a leadership role as the second vice chair. Due to voting schedules, he will be delayed, but once he arrives, we will pause the program for his remarks. Now, let's begin the conversation. To facilitate this panel, we are delighted to have a household name and a Latina icon, Maria Elena Salinas, as our moderator for this session. Maria Elena Salinas is an award-winning journalist and author, is one of the most recognizable and respected journalists in the country. In a career that spans nearly 4 decades, including serving as co-anchor of Univision's Evening News for more than 30 years. Her work has earned the top awards presented in broadcasting, among them multiple Emmys, including a Lifetime Achievement Emmy, a Peabody, 3 Gracie Awards, the Edward R. Murrow Award, and the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Television Political Journalism. Please welcome our moderator, Maria Elena Salinas.
Thank you so much, Antonella, and welcome to all of you. I'm so happy to be here. Very excited that CHCI put together this panel, and I'm sure that you have heard over and over again this week that it's so exciting to be able to gather together for first time in person after so long. But I'm going to say it again anyway, because it's been a long time for me since I have been to the CHCI conference, and I'm really, truly excited about it. And precisely, we are gathered here today to talk about a very important issue, and it's definitely one of the most complex issues of our times, and yet one that needs so much attention and so much compassion. It requires compassion. So, Immigrant Strength and Immigrant Dreams, that is the title of our panel today. And our amazing group of panelists, we've been chatting in the back, and you're in for a good surprise. They're here to share their wisdom and their experience on this very subject, to highlight the strengths of our community and the dreams that sometimes feel unreachable. Let's meet them. Erita Veras, Political Director of Immigration for Forward.us. Lucy Panza, Senior Manager of Public Policy at Amazon. Cristina Sanchez, Vice President of Public Affairs for Altamed Foundation, and Abel Núñez, Executive Director of CARES and the Central American Resource Center. Welcome to all of you.
Gracias.
So happy to see you. Well, why don't you tell us first, explain to us before I read a whole long bio, tell us in your words what you do and why this issue is important to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. A pleasure to be here. So I'm Eddie, the Political Director at Forward.us. Forward is a bipartisan advocacy organization, really focused on making sure that people are reunited, both from a criminal justice perspective, but also from an immigration perspective. And so happy to be here to share that story.
Great. Lucy.
Hi, my name is Lucy Panza. I'm a lobbyist at Amazon. I lobby Senate Democrats. I'm also the liaison to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus at Amazon. And I also manage our Hispanic-facing groups partnerships with Amazon. So I'm also the CHCI liaison. Very proud to support the conference.
Wonderful. Cristina.
Thank you, Maria Elena. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cristina Sanchez. I am the Vice President of Public Affairs for Altamed health services. Altamed is a federally qualified health center based in Los Angeles. We are the largest, serving over 500,000 patients, and we do it in a way that's culturally and linguistically competent. My role is external affairs, corporate communications, and social media. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Christina. Abel.
Thank you for having me. Abel Nunez. I am the executive director of the Central American Research Center. It's a 41-year-old organization that helps integrate immigrants into the local community. We have programs, legal clinic on immigration. We have a housing program, but we also do advocacy at a local level, at a national level with our partners, and then an international level, because our view of immigration is from a transnational lens. It's important for us to understand what happens in the countries of origin, countries of transit, and then, of course, countries of reception, to make sure that immigrants, as they make their choice of leaving their home, that they find a space and a welcoming space in their new homes here in the U.S.
You know, immigration is very interesting here in this country, where they just lump all the immigrants together in one little box. And yet we know that every immigrant has a story. They have a very particular set of circumstances that brought them or their families here. So I do want you to tell me, each one of you, your own personal immigrant story or the story of your family.
Yeah, for me, it started with my grandmother. She's from the Dominican Republic, and due to economic purposes, she had to find a way to make sure she and my mother, who's her first child, and her other 3 children, were able to have an opportunity. And so she came here to the United States. My story and my family's story is more of generational trauma of what separation looks like. My grandmother was here for 6 or 7 years, undocumented, unable to see my mother at a time where she was, I don't know if it's my mic.
Hopefully they'll fix it back there.
There we go. At a time where my mother was 12 and growing into, at the time was considered womanhood. And so my mom felt abandoned it was during the 70s, phones weren't easily accessible. And it was something that really stuck with me, and something that was passed down to me, because there was always a thing in the interaction that my mom and my grandmother, who's my second mother, will kind of interact with each other. And it wasn't until I moved back from Utah, I believe it was in 2008, late 18, that we were together, us 3, and we chatted, and I was like, there's this weird tension, and I want to get to the bottom of it. And one of the only ways that my mom was able to, and my grandma was able to give love, but my mom receive it, was by sending her packages, essentially, at the time. And what we figured out was that my mother, things that my grandmother was sending her didn't get to her. And so my mom took that as my grandmother not caring, my grandmother really abandoning her, and my mother being resentful that she had to raise her siblings. And so that occurred because of that separation and being unable to adjust status for so many years. Right. And I saw that transferring also to me of how she interacted with us. She's a great mother, but that trauma still lives. And I got into this work more intentionally to make sure that other families won't have to go through that, but that we also talk about the trauma even after adjusting status, and even folks that are without status, that their family go through it.
It's interesting because you're born in the U.S.,
yes.
So you're a first-generation immigrant.
Correct.
You're child of immigrants. How did that affect you personally?
It was very difficult to see my mom go through this abandonment, and she has noted it, but I really didn't understand it until there. And it's affected in the way that I think my mom has always expressed love to me, but it's been in very particular ways, in the ways that she would have wanted my grandmother to look and do. And so there's a lack of emotional expression, but it comes in other ways. And it wasn't until we talked about it that I was able to see it.
Right. Now he just moved from New York to Washington, so hopefully we'll be getting some care packages for you, right? From your mom.
Correct.
Lucy, tell us your immigrant story, your family story.
Sure. So I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I came to this country with my parents and my little brother when I was 20 months old. It took us 15 years to become naturalized citizens, but I was naturalized when I was 17. And I was really privileged during that entire time to never be undocumented or fall out of status. My parents are both doctors, educated in Argentina, came to the US on what are referred to as high-skilled visas, working in research at the National Institutes of Health. And so my little brother and I were derivatives of their visas, and we were always able to travel freely. We were always able to qualify for, anything and everything that a lawful immigrant and then a lawful permanent resident and then eventually a naturalized citizen could qualify for. That privilege was really highlighted for me when I went to work in the United States Senate for Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, which was the professional privilege of a lifetime, because I worked on immigration policy for him as an immigrant during the Trump era. And so I had not really appreciated the difference in the quality of life, living without fear, the differences in what what I did not have to worry about, having always been documented, having always been, quote, lawfully present under the eyes of DHS or the INS. But at the same time, I grew up speaking Spanish at home, English at school. There were a lot of inside jokes that I didn't understand growing up. A lot of vocabulary. I still think in Spanish and sometimes get stuck when I can't find the word. And I'm having, in November, a first generation baby of immigrants. And so
Congratulations.
Thank you. He will be a baby of one immigrant, and then his dad is very sweet, gringo, and so he will be a mixed
You had to
Latino baby.
clarify very sweet before you said gringo.
Yes, of course.
Right?
Oh,
Okay.
of course. So he'll be a mixed Latino baby, and so I now am in this new phase thinking about how am I going to impart to him his Argentinian heritage, his Latino heritage, what is the music I want him to listen to, what is the food I want to make sure he eats, how are we going to get him to Argentina as often as we can so he can meet everyone and be a part of, and we want to raise him bilingual, which is of course an additional challenge. So anyway.
That's wonderful. I can see that baby dancing tango right now.
And alfajores.
Cristina, tell
Thank
us
you.
tu historia.
My story, where do I start? I was born in Pacoima, California, who's here from LA, by the way. So, and although documented, I really need to take it back to my grandmother who was born in Beirut, Lebanon in 1900, and talk about the immigration as they were fleeing Christian persecution into South America. So they were on their way to somewhere, Venezuela, Argentina. And of course, in the way, there's sick and meek people that they needed to kind of leave off. And my grandma and her siblings and family were left at the port of Veracruz. Luckily, they made their way to Puebla, where she established a life in the textile industry. Those of you who know Mexico or even Latin America, lots of Lebanese families. But I think about what she had to go through. Very little education, obviously, having to support families, getting to know a country that was Mexico. I don't know what the immigration laws were back then, but I think one of the most prominent stories that comes to mind is that at 18 years of age, she had been dating clandestinely a Mexican person, of course, in Mexico. And they decided to get married in the Cathedral of Mexico City. And there was a big riot outside because the families, the Lebanese family, didn't want her to marry a Mexican. So you can imagine frontline pages, frontline headlines at El Heraldo de Mexico, with my grandma with her veil torn off, my grandpa with his top hat down, but she married a Mexican immigrant. Fast forward, my mom is born, she makes her way over to the US, and I'm born in Pacoima. One of the things my parents did, though, however, is they realized that the quality of education and life was not what they were expecting in the United States, and they did what few people do. packed us all up and took us back to Mexico. So I was 3.5, 4 years old when I arrived to Mexico. So really my early memories are growing up in a small town called Mexico City. Of course, there I was very just entrenched into the culture, family, etc. About 8 years later, my father gets ill and decides to come back to the US. So even though I did come over documented, my experience was that, one, I didn't know the language. Two, I was looked at as being not intelligent. They put me back a grade, and it was very hard. I was a young adolescent facing one of the biggest challenges, not only of just coming on to my own as a young Latina, but just being bullied. To this date, the person who saved me from being beat up is my best friend. Her name is Yvonne, because I was about to be beat up, because I was the wetback, I was the wada, etc. I continued my education, and then as I tried to assimilate, and I did, boy did I just knew that I had to really just swim and not sink and become a part of this country. I lost my Spanish until, of course, I got into college and realized that, darn, I gotta get it back because I'm gonna be more marketable. I think just the crux of the story is that I've been able to use my experience, positive, negative, the knowledge that I have of cultural competency in all the careers that I've had throughout my entire life. So again, double immigration, come back, nos rebotaron, I was here, I was there, but that's kind of in a nutshell my experience, Maria Elena.
It's great, very interesting. How about you, Abel? Tell us your immigrant story and your family.
So for me, it started, for our family, starts with my aunt, that in the late 60s, there was an American family living in El Salvador, and she worked for them. So when they decided to come back, they brought her with. She was part of the au pair program, right? Which many Salvadorans were no longer allowed to be in. But by the 70s, she was an American citizen and offers the opportunity of a lifetime to my father and says, hey, you wanna come to the US? And her first opening sort of bid to come to the US was, come by yourself and you can bring your family later. And he said, nope, if I can't come with my family, then I won't go. So she said she agrees, petitions my father, and just to see the difference between how immigration works, the process of family petition, when she applied for my dad, from the moment that she submits the application to the moment we were at Dallas Airport was 1 year. That process right now for Salvadorans is about 5 to 8 years. For Mexicans, it's about 20 years. So things have changed, but I ended up landing in Washington, D.C., which, for a lot of you folks that are from LA and other places, is a place of government, but I grew up in local D.C., right? And I remember being 8 years old and my father sending me off to school. And he said, gave him his sort of life lessons, and he told me two things. He said, one, you have to be twice as good as any American. And I was like, why? Why do I have to be twice as good? And he said, because you have to. He says, you're not from here, so you got to be twice as good. And then the second life lesson, remember Washington, D.C., it's an African-American enclave. He said, when you talk to like Black people, said, don't use the word negro, use the word moreno. Now, I did not know what that meant at that moment. I understand now what that is, but it was a clear understanding of the differences that we're having. Just to put it in context, at that moment, DC was, although the center of power, had a very large marginalized African-American community. We were precursor to the migration of Central Americans to the US. Right now, DC has the second largest Salvadoran community in the US, LA being the first. But the difference here is that both Maryland, Virginia, and DC, for those that have been here, know that we're majority, right? So it's a different flavor, right? So I grew up in my community, but there were challenges, of identity, of who I was, because I was old enough to remember my infancy in El Salvador and playing with my friends and doing all the games that you do in Latin America. But I also had this new life. I mean, by the time I was in, starting high school, I had lived equal parts in both countries and was really forgetting my roots, especially in a time where Salvadorans were fleeing, civil strife. And basically, we were sort of the unknown quantity at that point, right? People knew Caribbeans, they knew Mexicans, but Salvadorans not so much, right? As a matter of fact, many of the restaurants that you see here will have comida salvadoreña mexicana. That's just to kind of get people close to what type of food they're gonna have. But yeah, it's not Mexican food, by the way. Don't believe that. Don't believe the hype. But for me,
Pupusas and gorditas kind of look alike, but
they-
they're not, right?
they do. But that process of integrating in and kind of developing my identity of who I was I Salvadoreño? Yes, I was born there. Was I American? Although America didn't necessarily accept, fully. And so trying to carve out that identity and figure out, I mean, part of the reason that I do what I do is that when my father told me that I needed to be twice as good, I just saw how unfair it is. And then you go to school and you learn, everybody's created equal, and this is, and I'm like, well, hold up, they're telling me something else at school, and I'm getting something else while living a very Salvadoran experience at home, a very much an American, African American experience in my school life. So you had this two worlds that you had to navigate, which actually is very good. So a lot of us know how to code switch, right? We know how to hang out with our grandparents and listen to old style music, but then we go listen to hip hop and American music and reggaeton and whatever else young people are listening to. But that was my experience in coming here and basically not just my experience, but my community's experience as it was trying to get established here, right? Because it's very different for Salvadorians that came at the time that I came, which we did not pass a 4-square block. That's where our community was. Columbia Heights, Adams Morgan, for those that are familiar with that was it. Nothing else. When you have now that we're bridging DC to Baltimore, DC to Richmond, I mean, we're everywhere now, right? So it's a very different stuff. I also came before internet and cable. So what I knew of the United States was that they were all blonde and blue people. And as soon as you got here, you got a house and you got a car, because that's what I saw in the movies. And then I came here to an African-American enclave. We were poor. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was a minority. I did not know that until I came to the US. Because in El Salvador, I'm a member of the dominant sort of culture there. But you come here and I'm a minority. I'm like, what, really? So all of those identity, sort of issues kind of clash with each other, and you try to negotiate as best you can at the same time that your own community was growing in the geographic area. So all of that, shape who I am and what I do.
We're going to talk about identity, but before, I have some breaking news. Yes, Representative Espaillat is here. He's ready.
Thank you for indulging me and allowing me to interrupt this wonderful dialogue about
No interruption at all. We're very happy you're here.
la fuerza del emigrante y el sueño del emigrante. I don't know if it can fit in this room. I don't think so. It's huge, right? And often we see people with small pieces of luggages coming to the United States, but they're full of dreams and aspirations. And so it's a great topic, and I think a very timely one, particularly the juncture, the crossroad that we're in our nation today. And often feel that the immigrant community, the Latino community, is misunderstood in this country. They still have not been able to understand us because we're diverse, right? And we dance and sing to similar rhythms, but with exactly the same instruments, played by the same instrument. And so they cannot understand. I was hearing about Columbia Heights, and I'm from Washington Heights. So I went to Columbia Heights the minute I got here, and I felt at home. I felt that, this is just like the neighborhood I grew in. I grew up in it. And so there are neighborhoods like that all over the country. And so our diversity makes it difficult for America to understand us. And they think that just with a quick, off-the-cuff, knee-jerk reaction, slogan, they could capture all of us, but that's not the case. And that's not the case. We're in our diversity is also our strength, right? What we bring to the table and everything that we do. And this is a critical time because we have dreamers and TPS recipient. I was over at the Port Authority in New York City to welcome the immigrants that are coming through the border, mainly from Venezuela, young couples with children, walking thousands of miles through the El Darién, which is like the Panamanian jungle with, panthers and jaguars and rivers and mountains and a forest. And they come with their little kids and they cross through Central America, through Mexico, and they come to the border and they land there in New York City, and all they want to do is work and make better for their children and those that will come in the future. And so this is a critical time that even dreamers that came here as small children and TPS recipients, which in essence are refugees, they're asylum seekers, that there is a pushback. And so in many ways, the dreams that our parents came with, that are realized through you, because you are that tear in the middle of the night when you miss your people back home, or the sweat when you bring down that gate of that business, right? Or the anxiety of knowing, what's going to come next. All of that is you. The work ethic and the prayers and the expectations, then it's you. And so in many ways, you're privileged to be here. But we're still at a crossroad. And so you're like the palace guard, the smartest, the fastest, the strongest. That's why they're there in the palace. You're the palace guard to take care of everything else that came before you. And I am confident that you will do that you will take this opportunity by storm, and that you will make it happen. And that those dreams of our ancestors and our parents and grandparents and the strength of the immigrant is realized through you. Through you. I always say that, often America, particularly corporate America, wants to categorize this and say, well, this is what they stand for. This is who they are. No, it's so many intangibles that you bring to the table. Your creativity, your music, your innovativeness, your resilience. The fact that you're here now is all of that. And so sometimes the traditional corporate settings cannot decipher that. And they say, well, they like to play soccer, I'm not a baseball player. I used to, but I'm not in, my knees don't allow me to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. I often start a speech saying, yes, I'm from the Dominican Republic and I'm not a shortstop. Right? And so you're here today, and I hope that you will stand up, and we must all stand up for them in realizing the dream of the immigrant and showing our strength in the numbers that we have and the ability to vote and the ability to do the things that we can do if we can come together. So I thank you for inviting me. This is a very timely discussion. And we see in the media, I've been down to the border a few times, and let me tell you just one before I close. I welcome a young Venezuelan family who had come from the border, maybe the first one to come to New York City. They came to Union Station, sent by Governor Abbott, and they didn't have any relatives or anybody that they knew. And so when they asked them, where do you want to go? All they knew was, oh, we want to go to New York. So they send them to New York. And they traveled to New York and went to a shelter overnight. They had to then leave the shelter. And then they began to walk. And they walk almost the full length of the Bronx because they have been walking for months, 2,000 miles. So I finally got to them in a playground. And the husband, young couple with a 1-year-old baby and a 3-year-old little boy. The husband is a barber, and he had his barber equipment there in a plastic little bag, his cutter and everything. And he went to a Dominican barber shop that was right across the park. When he went there, he left his equipment there. I took him back to the shelter, and sure enough, we got him an apartment. The city got them an apartment. It turns out the apartment was 2 blocks away from the barber shop. He comes back to the barber shop to get his equipment back, and the owner of the barber shop says, "This chair here is yours. You're starting on Monday."
Oh.
Right? And he started crying. He says, wow, in 24 hours, I got an apartment for my family. My kids are starting school on Monday, and I'm going to start cutting hair on Monday, 2 blocks away from where I live. I said, what a nation. What a country, right? The promise of America. You must make that promise come true for all of us. So I thank you for inviting me. Keep up the fight. We're very proud of you, and never forget to lose the faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias por venir. Thank you so much, Congressman, for that beautiful story, the beautiful stories that you told. I wish that everyone was that lucky to come here as an immigrant, and the story that he just told of someone arriving and getting a job and getting home right away. It doesn't always happen that way for everyone. Before we go on with the rest of our questions, I just want you to know that you can also ask some questions. We'll leave a few minutes before we finish for your questions. And if you decide that you want to put anything that you hear on social media, remember, #CHCIHHM22. I memorized it. That was pretty good. Okay. Anyway, so Lucy, I do want to talk to you about all these problems that we have with immigration, as Congressman Espaillat was saying, are due to the lack of immigration reform, something that has taken decades, really. You worked in Congress for a while, so the government has been trying unsuccessfully for decades to reform our broken immigration system. Where do we stand now?
Oof.
And why is it so difficult?
I mean, it's difficult because of racism. It's really not that hard to understand, unfortunately. I wish it were more complicated than that. Where do we stand? I think, the last major attempt was in the year 2013. It would be remiss if I didn't mention my former boss, Majority Leader Schumer, led this incredible bipartisan effort with Senator John McCain, the late Senator John McCain from Arizona. They passed a very strong bipartisan bill out of the Senate. John Boehner was terrified of the Tea Party at the time and refused to give it a vote in the House, and that bill died. Senator Durbin from Illinois, of course, Majority Leader Schumer, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, the new Latino senators, Senator Padilla, Senator Lujan, Senator Cortez Masto, they will never stop fighting. And, I lived through 2 government shutdowns on the topic of the border wall and immigration in the Trump era. And obviously my comments are going to sound partisan, and I know we're in a nonpartisan space, but I was just never prouder to work for Senate Democrats. I took 2 trips to the border, 3 trips with staff, one with Majority Leader Schumer and 14 of his colleagues. I mean, these are public servants who care deeply, and it would be a lot easier for them not to care. And that's just the Senate. Of course, Congressman Espaillat is joined by 34, 35 members of the CHC in the House who will never stop fighting. But it's hard because there's a contingent in our country that has a grip on one of our parties that just thinks that our country is full, doesn't think that there's space anymore, or perhaps that there ever was. And their demands in exchange for reform are very, very, very painful demands regarding border security, asylum reforms. You know, their demands for reform are very, very painful to swallow and border on the inhumane at times, depending on who you're talking to in those negotiations. So it's just become, unfortunately, an intractable issue at times. I have a lot of, I take a lot of inspiration from Dreamers and TPS folks and immigrants here in other lawful statuses, foreign-born students, researchers, you know, people who are here to make a better life for themselves and their families, but also to contribute to this country. I mean, you know, my dad instilled in me a hunger, which I think is very akin to what Abel's dad said to him about, you know, you always have to be better, et cetera. My dad instilled in me, you always have to be hungry. You know, you always have to be hungry and never settle and never be content. And that is really, I see that in every meeting I ever took on this issue. I see that in every immigrant I ever meet in DC or wherever I travel. And I know Senator Schumer and his colleagues see it in all their constituents who are fighting for this. So I take inspiration from that. But until our culture as a country shifts to one of openness and compassion, it's not going to get solved.
Right. I also take inspiration on Dreamers, and talking about that, we know that the most successful cohort of immigrants have been the Dreamers. Eddie, as we know, they marched, they protested, but they also sat down in Congress with legislators to talk, to lobby. And I think that's probably one of the ways that they were able to get somewhat moving it forward. And they were advocating for DACA, of course. Their contribution to this country is immeasurable and undeniable. Yet they're still in limbo. Up to this day, they're still in limbo. Where do we stand with that?
Yeah, so before I know where do we stand, I just want to acknowledge that what I'm about to say is something very real to a lot of folks that are directly impacted by this. It's very real to their families, to their brothers and sisters, to their sons and daughters. And so I just want to note that before I note this. So DACA is very likely to go away. Currently, in a case, Texas versus United States, being heard by the Fifth Circuit Courts of Appeal, which is a very conservative court. They're looking at the constitutionality of DACA itself, very separate from other litigation in cases that have come up. It is very likely that DACA, an unfavorable decision of DACA will come down at any minute. It can come down today, all the way to the end of the year, where one or two things can happen. Either DACA is fully taken away as a whole, or protection or either work permits are taken away. DACA works because you have the deportation protection and you have work permits. This is why a lot of the contributions you noted have occurred. And so without a viable, and I say viable very clearly, bipartisan solution, by the end of the year, this administration, the Biden administration, and the next Congress will oversee the deportation of DACA recipients and Dreamers. And so Republicans have been clear. Minority Leader McCarthy had noted he will not put a legalization bill on the floor. Tillis today in a hearing, Senator Tillis from North Carolina noted that in order to get something done, it needs to happen this session. So we have a few months from now to the end of the year, December, to get something done.
How realistic is that in this political environment?
I have to be an optimist, and I have to be hopeful in the work that we do. And I have to be hopeful for the colleagues, friends that are dependent on DACA. But it's not just DACA, it's also the dreamers who don't have it and deserve also that peace of mind. And so what I will call people from anywhere from interns all the way to businesses and staffers here is to make this into a priority. Congress has run out the clock on this issue. There's no temporary DACA that they can just put down the line. And even if we were to appeal the case, it goes to the Supreme Court. With a very conservative makeup of the court, what are the chances it stays? And so that's the question I put forth. And the ask for you folks is to today, tomorrow, when you're interacting with Congress, when you're interacting with staffers and your bosses, you make this a priority. There is no way that DACA recipients and Dreamer will have a pathway forward without a viable solution this year.
Could I also add quickly, Maria Elena, just that, because Senator Schumer and I confronted this legislative frustration so many times, the advocacy needs to be targeted to the members of Congress who oppose a solution. I think it's, and the burden cannot just be on Dreamers to put their bodies on the line and get arrested time and again and risk deportation, violating their current DACA if they get to a certain level on their criminal record. We, lawful immigrants and naturalized citizens, need to fight for them. And we need to target our advocacy at those members of Congress who are opposed to legalization. And they're very obvious who they are. They love to out themselves. And they need to be held accountable.
Before we move on to some of our audience's question, Cristina and Abel, you both work for organizations that are very much in touch with the community, health services. In your case, Cristina, I know that you have constant contact with the community, and Abel, through other services that you provide for your community here. So how are they affected by the lack of progress on immigration reform? Cristina, you want to start?
I'm going to go ahead
Either
with
one.
that one. I think the first question is why a community health center? Well, we talked about the number of patients that we have. And although we have access to them, when we're talking about 20% of their life, which is health, and they're there for a checkup or whatever may be going on, we know that many times the social determinants of health, where they live, not having access to food or clean water or living near a freeway affects their health overall. That's why we knew that we have their attention. Our doctors, our nurses, are trusted messengers, and we have a very robust civic engagement campaign. We also know that our community, they're here legally, they may be residents and have not registered to become naturalized citizens. And therefore, we take our role very seriously, that not only are we treating them in their health within the 20% in our four walls, but the rest of the 80% of their life is dependent on whether or not they are actively participating in the democratic process in the United States. Are they registered to vote? Do they go out and vote? Are they electing representatives that are going to make a difference? Again, Orange County, Los Angeles, very different politics altogether. We know the Orange County, but we know that we have the power and the voice to be able to make a difference. And again, our robust civic engagement campaigns are something that we're very, very proud of.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is that I think that this country has sort of a very split personality, right? So we can't get our head around a legislation that would provide a pathway to legalization, but we have an economy that completely depends on immigrant labor, right? So unless you want to pay $12 for a tomato, we need migration, right? If people want to get their Social Security checks in the next couple of years, we need migration into this nation. I think for the people that I serve, at the end of the day, and I always tell this, the arguments of immigration happens in the political circles. People want to know, can I feed my family today? Can I walk down the street without getting shot? Those are the things that they want. Can I provide for my family? Now, it does clash, right? When they can't do anything, when their child comes and says, there's a field trip or I want a scholarship to a foreign country, they're like, yeah, mijo, but you can't go, because, and that's when they realize. So on a day-to-day basis, is it in the forefront of their mind? No. But for long-term stability, yes. People want to contribute. They are contributing. They will continue to contribute, right? And they are needed. So I think that is on us to continue that fight, because they are busy ensuring that this economy is thriving. And so the least that we can do is fight to our fullest to ensure that they can get a process by which they can get legalized.
Thank you, Abel. Do any of you have questions? Have a microphone over here? Oh, the microphone is right here to the right. To my right, to your left? Oh, there's another one on that side? Okay, so please state your name and your question and who it's directed to.
And so I've been paying attention, right, to the panel the last couple of days and listening to all the topics and everything. But everybody always talks about how everybody's like divided, right? When we're talking about like Latinos, when you really get down to it, it's like the South Americans, Central Americans, and everything. What I want to know is like, what do we really have to do to declare like a Latin revolution? To be like, to instead of moving in gear, to say, hey, we're not playing around. The people that are in power right now, they're not going to deliver the dream. We're all dreaming because it's like we're asleep. What do we have to do to wake up? That's my question for you guys.
That's a good question. I don't know who wants to answer it, but basically I think the issue is, what can people do? I mean, what's their call to action for voters out there, for the Latino community out there?
I mean, I think we definitely have to participate, and I agree with that, but we also have to understand in the context in which we live, right? Not only are we more polarized as a nation, and that's within our own community. I mean, we've seen how some of the voting has happened in Texas and Florida and all that stuff. And I don't want to go there, but there is that division, right? And the one thing we can never forget, that the dominant culture is not just going to sit by until we get our act together. They're actively seeking to stop it, right? Because they are afraid that they're losing the stewardship of the resources of the nation. And that's deep, because when they see us, they don't see, wow, look, our country's so diverse, we're so wonderful, we got culture. They're like, my son is not going to get into Harvard because that means the slot goes to one of you. Right? That job at Amazon, it's not going to my daughter, it went to you. Right? And so the dominant culture, including people, our allies, are also thinking the same thing. So we have to fight at both fronts. One, to unify ourselves, right? And there's a lot of work to do that. We come with very different experiences, but also understand the context that, when you talk about that racism, it is because they're afraid. The numbers are, whether we like it or not, we're going to be the largest group soon. And that scares the dominant culture because they feel like, is America going to be America? It is a sort of very deep question that they're dealing with, not realizing that we want to be Americans, that we want to be part of this nation. We are part of this nation and we continue to build it. So I would say we need to work on both fronts and we need to continue working on both fronts.
Thank you. I have a question on this side.
Yes, hi, my name's Naomi. I'm a student at Mount Holyoke College. I'm a first generation and low income student, and my parents are immigrants from Mexico. My question for you is piggybacking off of what was just asked, but truly, how can we combat this sense of hopelessness? My parents immigrated here from Mexico 20 years ago. They're not citizens, and I know a lot of people in my community from Carpentersville, Illinois, have this hopelessness of how are we going to get out of these systems? What are we going to do in the wake of DACA probably being taken away and seemingly impossible pathways to citizenships? What do we do?
It seems like there's a thread here where people want to do something and don't know what to do. What is your call to action for them?
Yeah, it's a hard question because there's no right answer. There's nothing I think any of us could say on the stage that will fully answer both questions or suffice the needs of our community. But one of the things I I started my work in state work, right? In New York, we've been able to pass legislations such as driver's license, making sure that that when people are going to courts, immigrants are going to courts, that ICE is not just going out there and rounding them up or waiting for them, and tuition equity and so on and so forth. And one of the ways is that we need to also work on states and not just federal law, because there's a lot of protections and mitigation that can come from doing state work that I think we've all seen. It's not just the Californias of the world and the New Yorks of the world, but also the Arkansas of the world. There's also the Utahs of the world, Texas, and so on and so forth. And yes, I'm not going to not acknowledge that certain states are harder, but there are ways to advocate. There are ways to really figure out what can you get out of in those states that would allow for further protection, further mobility, and further social and economic mobility for immigrant communities, and particularly those who are undocumented. And so that's one of the things I would say, in particularly during the era of Trump, that's something I focused on while still doing federal work. And we found that that is one of the best ways to connect with people who their main priority is feeding their family, right? It's not that they don't think about it, but they want to know, how can I pay the rent and how can I do this? And finding those avenues to interact with them and engage with them and activate them in that way can be helpful.
I'm here to ask questions and not answer them, but I would say vote. I think it's important. And the reason why I say that is because we have, less than half of Latino eligible voters actually go out and vote. And, if we are eligible to vote and we don't vote, then we don't have the moral authority to complain. So that's one way that we can do it. I know that that's a long-term solution. It's not going to fix problems right away. But, whoever can vote, vote. And to get your family to vote and get your neighbors to vote, get your tia to vote, and be active that way. Sorry for the answer.
And Maria, I would just like to add, let's look at history, right? So for those that are familiar with TPS, it was a Central American community that sort of pushed it. When it was approved in 1990, Salvadorans got it. And true to his word, President Bush at that time ended it after 18 months. But you know what happened? When it ended, we got DD. And when that ended, we got NACARA. And so we were able to move along. So we cannot rely only on one vehicle. So DACA is not the only vehicle that we need to operate in, right? Because I think it feels like in the past, DACA was sort of a smaller component. Now it's like the only thing. It's like, no, we need to be more creative about every vehicle and every avenue to get us moving forward.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
So, all right, you can hear me? All right, perfect. One, thank you for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you guys. My name is Gabriel Mendoza, a proud first-generation student. And I wanted to ask you guys, you all spoke about experiences, about a sense of resentment or pushback from your educational institutions and throughout your education, right? I know that for a lot of predominantly Spanish-speaking homes and students who have parents that are migrants, they will systematically experience far greater barriers than any other demographic. What do you guys believe we should do to best support our students as they try and rise above those barriers without having to exhaust themselves to be seen as the model minority student?
That's a great question. Who would like to answer that?
I actually think mental health services are really, really important. I think that the burden of growing up in an immigrant household is really exhausting for a little kid, or it can be. And a lot of times, little immigrant kids or first generation kids are growing up in communities that are dealing with the exact same burdens, and they don't really have an outlet to understand how to just be a kid. And I know this may sound basic to a lot of you, but I only really realize it now, being 37, and obviously my mommy brain is firing off. But that what I went through as a little kid, and sort of how not being from here and not ever feeling fully American or fully Argentinian messed me up a little bit, and how what I had to craft for myself, together with my little brother. So I don't know if formal mental health services is necessarily what I'm talking about, but I think we need more support for kids to give them a chance to be kids. And to give them a chance to really see all the contributions that they can make in this world, which I know is a privilege when you're just trying to get food on the table, or when, God forbid, you're, facing a deportation proceeding or something like that. But I don't know. There's something about the burden and that I think can really limit immigrant communities from realizing how much they do have to contribute and how many opportunities they could take advantage of if they had some sort of external support.
I'm sorry, that was the last question. I know that there's someone else standing there, but we have run out of time, so I apologize, not able to get that. We're getting to our final thoughts, and I want to really end on something more positive. I want you to inspire all of these young people, because as bad as things are, there's a lot of upside, and there's a lot of reasons for us to be proud of our cultural heritage. I know that I grew up bilingual, bicultural, and my parents always made me feel like that was my superpower. So that conflict of ni soy de aquí, ni soy de allá, I put it to the side burner and use it to feel more powerful. Hablas dos idiomas, vales por dos. That's what my parents used to tell me, so valgo por dos, sorry. Cristina, let's start with you.
We know that the immigrant community, in particular the Latino community, has been a political lightning rod. We need to unite, and it's not just Mexicanos, Salvadoreños, Guatemaltecos. It's bringing other communities, the Haitians, and others who are facing similar immigrant struggles. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, especially with this very tough topic. We know folks are dealing with inflation, gun safety, and so many other issues. Get involved. Like Maria Elena said, talk to your tios, our younger generation. Sometimes I feel like they're very disconnected, and this particular issue does not resonate with them, but we need to unite. We need to make sure that everybody is out at their ballot boxes, making a difference. Representation matters.
Thank you, Abel. Final thought.
We're living in amazing times. I mean, I think that this conference is an example of that. These things did not exist in the past. And I think that we need to really focus on how, for us, we can continue to be mentors, right? And then for you, that you need to start thinking, how do you start talking to the next generation, right? Because this was created by folks when we were kind of young talking about this, and this is where we're at. And it's a continuum, right? We're only one step in that process of integration with the immigrant experience. I think you're the next step. And to realize that you are connected to a past and we are connected to your future makes me hopeful that we're going to be in a better place.
It's wonderful. Lucy.
I think, when you feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenge of whatever, your identity may bring to bear on your life, think about someone or read about someone or try to find someone who's doing what you wish you could do. Think about, whether it's Vice President Harris from earlier this week, who's of course such an inspiring person, or someone here at the conference who's much more accessible than the vice president. What did they do to get to where they are? Try to find concrete examples to help you form a path that you could follow, because the negative stuff we're talking about, to Maria Elena's point, doesn't have to hold you back. You possess already everything that you need to surpass it.
Give us some Dominican knowledge here. Some Dominican wisdom to close.
Well, one of the things, we are kind of taught to work hard, work at all costs, and burn ourselves out. And so I'm on a mission, and I want to share this mission with you all, is find joy at all costs, where, how, and when you can. And because that joy is what's going to continue to keep you going year to year, day to day, hour by hour. And, we are Latinos, we're a multiracial community. And so let's not suffer in perpetuity. Let's not suffer in silence, and let's find joy when we can.
Thank you so much to this wonderful panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause. And of course, thank you so much to CHCI, not just for putting this panel together, but this conference together. This concludes the conference. I hope you all enjoyed the last few days that you were here. It's not quite over yet because it's a reception at the concourse that you can continue partying, celebrating, because after all, this is a kickoff for Hispanic Heritage Month, which is all about celebrating our culture, and we do not have to stop October 15th. We can keep on going the rest of the year. I think it's very good advice to just celebrate who we are. Thank you very much.